Good evening, everyone. I'm Dana Perino, and welcome to Fox News Tonight. There's been a big shakeup in President Trump's cabinet tonight. Earlier this evening, Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price resigned after pressure for taking private charter flights on the taxpayer's dime. We're going to have more on that later in the show. But first, our top story, the culture war growing even hotter. All eyes are on the NFL this weekend to see if some players continue with their refusal to stand for the national anthem. Last night, every player stood for the Star-Spangled Banner during the weekly Thursday game. Here's what President Trump had to say about that.
Well, I've spoken to other owners, and I really think it's coming together. I noticed last night, or I was told, I didn't see it, but I heard everybody stood for the national anthem, and that shows respect for our country, our flag, and for the national anthem. So, I'm very happy. I heard that. And they should stand. You have to stand. It's our national anthem.
There's new polling on the anthem issue, which we will show you in a few minutes. The anthem controversy isn't the only front that's heating up. In a story that seems like it's from the pages of The Onion, get this, a Massachusetts librarian rejected First Lady Melania Trump's donation of Dr. Seuss books because they're examples of, quote, racist propaganda. Maybe she's thinking of a different Dr. Seuss. I don't know. But joining us now for a reaction is the Blaze's Lawrence Jones, and in Los Angeles, a good friend, Leslie Marshall, a radio talk show host and a Fox News contributor. You all have lots of titles. Friends are one of them, and joining me late night on a Friday night, I do appreciate it. Lawrence, if I could start with you on the NFL. We did see possibly the NFL and some of the teams figuring out a way to do this. So Jerry Jones of the Dallas Cowboys, I know you're from Dallas, basically that they said, we're going to kneel, and then we're going to stand for the anthem. And is that what the other teams are picking up, that maybe that's the way that they can show solidarity with their teams and the patriotism that they have for the country?
Yeah, because I think it's important to note that the movement was actually dying for a period of time. You had Colin Kaepernick that depicted cops as essentially pigs, and so a lot of people didn't support him. You had other, like 3 athletes that decided to support the movement, but the movement was dying, and the president kind of ignited the movement back up and stirred the pot. But as it relates to the Dallas Cowboys, what they decided to do is that they were going to stand together as far as kneeling before the national anthem against the president, but then showing respect for the anthem. So that was a balanced approach. But I do think that this movement has evolved for the original thing, which was police brutality. Now it's a movement against the president.
Leslie, how do you see it? Because I know that you pay a lot of attention to these issues, and when you do radio, I know you hear from a lot of people, and I'm curious what you heard as the week went on.
Well, I think, and I know we're going to show some polls later, but, the diehard fans want to see football. And I have to admit, being from Boston, I'm a Pats fan, but I'm one of those that I show up for the Super Bowl. And, of course, because of my job, I'm tuning in. But I would be tuning in to see, are they going to stand? Are they going to kneel? Are they going to lock arms? There was a meeting earlier with the NFL commissioner, owners, coaches, and they really decided that they need to do something regarding this issue going forward and regarding unity. I think the bottom line is the people are telling me that are calling in, they want to see the game. They don't think these people are being anti-American. After all, every NFL player has an American flag on their helmet. But they do feel that this has become quite a distraction to their favorite sport.
You mentioned the polls. Let's see if we can pull those up. This is a new CBS poll that is just out. So the question was, the views of Americans who were polled in this and the player protests of the national anthem, approve of them 38%, but disapprove 52%. So I think that shows, obviously, the majority thinks that standing for the national anthem is correct. But then take a look at this one, which is this question of the president and his comments. And the views of President Trump's rally from last weekend, disapprove of that 48%. So just 4 points lower than that 52%. So I think both things can be true. Like, you can think that people have a right to protest. You can also think the president may have gone too far. But maybe after a week of all of this heat, by Sunday, Lawrence, does it sort of calm down and we find a way to get back to football, but also to deal with the issue? I think that there is a real opportunity for bipartisan movement forward on criminal justice reform, and I think that the president could play a leading role in that.
Yeah, Dana, I think we talked about this off air as well. I had a problem with the president specifically commenting on another man's business. It would be like somebody in Trump Tower going into and telling Donald Trump to fire everyone. I think that was problematic, and I think that's why a lot of the NFL players rallied against it. But as it relates to criminal justice reform, which a lot of Republicans are leading the way, I think that's a conversation that needs to happen. Now, it's been problematic because one of the people that the president appointed, Jeff Sessions, is against criminal justice reform. And we have senators all the way from Ted Cruz all the way to Rand Paul saying this is an issue that we need to tackle. I think a lot of people in America have real experience. When you have Tim Scott, who was the first black senator since Reconstruction, saying, I've been stopped by Capitol Police 6 times and had an actual experience, and then people saying, no, he's a part of the problem too. This is a guy that is a conservative just like me, and that's on our side. So maybe we do need to have these conversations. 90%, 95% of cops are on the right side of this. But those bad apples, how do we handle that? And that takes a national conversation.
Leslie, do you think there's a chance for bipartisan agreement on that? Because I know that, for example, Cory Booker agrees with Rand Paul. There's actually probably more agreement on that than just about anything on Capitol Hill right now.
Yes, because I think it comes down to justice, and I think Democrats and Republicans both see when there are injustices, especially toward African Americans, which, by the way, take the knee. That's how it all started, and that's really what it was about. It wasn't I hate this country. It was I don't like what is going on among the African American community.
But he wore
those
those
in
pig
this country
socks,
to start with.
Yeah, the pig socks.
He wore those socks, and so it destroyed his message. When you depicted all cops as pig, it would be like just like an officer wearing a shirt that said that all black people were thugs and were criminals. I'm sure the black community, as I would, push back against that. And I think that's part of the problem, Leslie. A lot of people, when they interject in this conversation, specifically on the left, maybe not you, but they make this a racist issue when it's really a government intrusion issue. And I think when we start having those conversations from that perspective, then we can reach some common ground.
Wait, Lawrence, sorry, I got to disagree with you there. Just when you look at the statistics, and you're African American,
I'm a black man, and I know the experience.
Well, exactly. You know that experience. You live that experience. I only hear from people that have that experience. But when you just look at the stats at who is being stopped, for what reason or where and by whom, and then when you look at the fatalities or the injuries when a gun is fired, I'm sorry, but I do think that the element of racism is there. And by the way, that is another national conversation we need to have that I think that we can have bipartisan agreement on going forward.
Well, look, and that, I think we might agree on one more thing. So I want to bring this up to you first, Lawrence. So this librarian in Massachusetts, she is a teacher as well as a librarian. She's one of the recipients of the generous offer that Melania Trump, the First Lady of the United States, sends Dr. Seuss books out. And this librarian has to post an open letter, and she says that actually she doesn't appreciate it. She thinks that the schools were wrongly targeted and that Dr. Seuss, especially the Cat in the Hat, is racist.
After she was seen in the photo.
Yeah, that's her in the actual Dr. Seuss outfit.
I think this is more of about the Trump name, and because her Melania's last name is Trump. But I think First Lady should be off. I know Michelle Obama got some pushback because she was telling people how to feed their children with the healthy meal initiative.
But that was her policy initiative. That's what she cared about.
It wasn't so much of a partisan thing. But I just think we should allow First Ladies to be graceful and take these causes head on. And whether you're talking about Michelle Obama or Melania Trump, I think we should just not talk about them.
Well, the interesting thing is that this librarian did this open letter. Like, we would have never even known about this except for the librarian sort of pushed it out into the open, and then the First Lady's office responded. Leslie, why does the left make it so easy for the right to get outraged?
Well, maybe, I don't know, because we're talking about it. First of all, this librarian, I'm from Boston. And you know that, Dana. Cambridgeport, where she is and where that school is an extremely wealthy school district where most of their parents have PhDs and 7 letters after their name with all of their titles. And I got to tell you, I love Dr. Seuss. I don't think when I read One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish, it's racist. My kids loved it. It's on our bookshelf. However, no, with the red fish and the blue fish, Dana. Come on, follow. Okay. But the bottom line here is, I do believe that it was right for her to return the books because this is an uber rich community.
Okay,
Another
I'm
school
going to
could have been better served.
Here's the thing. if the librarian was that offended and that she's like, look, we don't even need these books because we're such a wealthy place, then here's an idea. Instead of trying to come down on Melania Trump, why not gather up the books with the students and go and do a service project where they read to children who actually need some help? Like, why does it have to turn into something against Melania Trump? That's where I think that the librarian, with all of her PhDs and all the stuff, like, sort of really missed the boat.
Well, okay, Dana, this is one of the reasons we're friends, because this is what I said off the air earlier, is they should have just taken the books and gone to, you know, a school that was more needing of
Smart
of
women
those
think
books.
alike.
But I do, obviously, yes. Obviously, this is a woman who does not like Trump. But I have to say that I don't think the First Lady should have responded. I don't think, look, Laura Bush, your old boss's wife, Dana,
well, I mean,
she
like,
was a librarian, and she wouldn't have responded to
but
this.
here's the thing,
She would have just
Lawrence,
said, okay,
that if
if
you're in the press office, you're going to get the last word. If you're in the press office, I've been there, and you find out that this librarian did the blog post, and you get a call from the press, like, what do you think about this? You're going to respond. Like, why not?
And this is a first lady that's been attacked for the heels that she wears, and
she's pretty classy when she
she's
responds.
And she really doesn't respond often. Remember, she's one of the people that tells President Trump, "Hey, be careful with the Twitter, be more presidential." And so when you have Melania Trump, who is a classy first lady, saying that something went wrong, I think we should take her word for it.
That's right. Well, Leslie and Lawrence, I have to thank you because this is Friday night. It's my last night of hosting this show.
Congratulations.
And I have made it. I'm still awake, and I have even stopped drinking caffeine for 15 days. So this is quite an accomplishment, and you were here for it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, up next, Secretary Tom Price is pushed out from President Trump's cabinet following his private jet scandal. We'll discuss the fallout when we come right back. As we mentioned at the top of the show, President Trump today accepted the resignation of Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price, who charged taxpayers for private chartered flights. Joining us now for a reaction is a man who has quite a few thoughts about government waste. That's Steve Hilton. You see him on Sundays at 9 p.m. Eastern on the Fox News channel as host of The Next Revolution. Steve joins us from Los Angeles, and thank you so much for being on tonight. We appreciate it. This is certainly not how the president expected to end his week, by firing his Health and Human Services Secretary. But on Wednesday, we sort of saw the writing on the wall that this was not a sustainable thing, that this is actually the swamp.
Yeah, great to be with you, Dana, and great job this week. I've been watching every night. It's been great to see you. I think that, you know, on a personal note, I think it's a little sad. Tom Price seems to me to be a decent enough man, but politically, I think this is exactly the right thing to do, because it sends a very important message to anyone in Washington who is tempted to use taxpayers' money to get the luxuries in life for themselves personally. That is just not okay, and completely cuts across what President Trump has been saying before and after the election about draining the swamp. But the real point is that this is really just, if you like, the tip of the alligator, if that's the right analogy, in terms of the swamp that's in D.C. This is a personal matter. It's right that he went, but what draining the swamp really means is getting to that web of political donations and lobbying and corruption that really affects policy for all our viewers tonight, and draining the swamp really means getting stuck into all of that, not just coming down on bad behavior when it happens like this.
And so talk to me about that, because earlier in the week we had on Monday the collapse of the second attempt at Obamacare repeal and replace, and you had the introduction kickoff by President Trump following up on his Missouri speech, but then in Indiana on tax reform. And is that the kind of sort of revolution that you talk about on your show, which is these are the actual matters, the issues that matter so much to the economy and to the people, and yet we seem unable to get them over the line? Tax reform could be different. What do you think?
Well, let's just take healthcare first, and just take something very specific. Even just this year, 2017, the pharmaceutical industry has spent nearly $150 million on lobbying. So we got Tom Price spending $1 million on plane trips, $150 million on lobbying, hundreds of thousands of dollars of donations to members of Congress sitting on the committees that make the rules that affect their business. The consequence is higher drug prices for Americans. The vote on repeal and replace Obamacare, that comes down, I think, in the end, to something else that's very swampy, but of a different nature, which is the individual political motivations of members of the Senate. I thought Kimberly Strassel in the Wall Street Journal wrote a brilliant column today pointing out that the most powerful people in terms of implementing the president's agenda right now are Susan Collins, Rand Paul and John McCain.
Right.
And particularly looking at Susan Collins, why is she against basically anything in terms of repeal and replace? Because she's thinking of running for governor next year. And so that's the first consideration for her. When it comes to tax reform, though, and this is something we're going to be looking at on the show this Sunday, I think that for once you've got more chance of something really happening, because there does seem to be an element of unity around certainly some of the key planks of this tax plan, for example, reducing the corporate rate, where support for that goes, there's not just across the Republicans, but even some Democrats agree with that.
Let me just run this quote by you, because Rich Lowry in the National Journal wrote about what you're talking about, sort of big picture, and he said the Republican Party can't pass Obamacare repeal, but it can nominate Roy Moore in Alabama. This is the state of the GOP in a nutshell. It is a party locked in mortal combat between an establishment that is ineffectual and unimaginative and a populist wing that is ineffectual and inflamed. And you have the benefit of not being necessarily in this bubble. You're in California. That might be another bubble. But looking at this, do you think that he's right that the party, at least the Republicans, he's talking about them and the inability to see eye to eye. Then you have the Democrats also within a split. And the American people are sort of sit there wondering, at what point is somebody going to do something for us?
I think it's the big political question of our times, and it's one of the main things that we focus on in our show, and I describe it as positive populism. How can we take this populist movement that is roiling both parties, the Republicans as you've described, but also the Democrats with the Bernie Sanders wing, and turn it into a positive agenda for reform that gets things done? The interesting thing with the Republicans, though, I think it's more than the two wings. Yes, you've got the establishment. Yes, you've got the populists, but there's also the conservatives, and I think one of the biggest tensions, actually, is the difference of view politically between centre-right populists and conservatives. It's not the same thing at all. And one specific example of that you saw this week in relation to the tax plan is that President Trump, as a populist, is very keen to make sure that the tax plan doesn't benefit the highest earners and therefore was against some kind of big reduction in the top rate. You saw Rush Limbaugh last night on Sean's show being very worked up about that and saying that is not conservative. Conservatives believe in lowering rates for everyone, including the wealthiest, because that stimulates the economy. That's a real tension within the party. It's not establishment versus populists, it's actually conservatives versus populists. So this is going to take a long time to work out.
I believe that you have a good friend of mine on your show this weekend, CHRİS Stirewalt.
He is heading over. I'm very excited about that.
Just make sure you feed him a steak, if you can. That'll make sure that he'll be in a really good mood for you for your show on Sunday night, which I love and I watch on Sundays.
Is it right before we go on air, or does he need time to digest it?
It's a constant need of feeding, so you may just have to space it out a little bit. All right, Steve, thank you so much, and good luck with the show this weekend.
And good luck to you for Monday. I'm really excited.
Monday too. I'm going to see you there one of these days. All right, thank you so much.
I love the
straight
logo
ahead
for the show. Very presidential. I love it.
I hope. Okay, straight ahead, the federal government scrambled to ramp up aid efforts to Puerto Rico right after this. Hurricane Maria smashed into Puerto Rico more than a week ago, and the island is still without electricity. Fox News' Geraldo Rivera has been doing some great reporting on the island, and he just filed this report for us.
Dana, partisans from the left and right want a good guy and they want a bad guy. They want evil. They want competence. They want incompetence. The fact of the matter is Puerto Rico was a disaster waiting to happen. The electrical grid on this island is entirely suspect. The Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority is bankrupt. They have been scrimping on maintenance for years. I was here in September 2016. They were blacked out for 3 days just because of a fire in a single power plant. The cabling, 16,000 miles of wires stretching throughout the villages and cities here on the island of Puerto Rico, are antiquated and very poorly maintained. The power stations themselves, ironically, and that is the bitter irony, are functioning perfectly. but there is no way to get the electric cables, the electric power from the power plants to the people who need them. That's why there is no fuel. They can't pump the gas from the tanks in the ground. That's why there's no water in these high-rise buildings. I call them the zombie condos, because there is no power, no electrical power to run the elevators. That's why this situation is so very dire. The main culprit, two female names, Irma and Maria, two historic storms that hit this island back to back. Maria came ashore with 155, 160 mile-an-hour winds. This system had no chance of withstanding against that kind of power. Yesterday, I met with someone who worked for me for 14 years. My old handyman, Jose Cuevas, was bereft. His dock is destroyed. So much of his business is destroyed. His daughter, Natalie, was actually my secretary at Fox News. Before I get back to the story about the power situation, here's what Natalie had to say about when Maria came ashore.
It was very tough. The water came out. All the ceilings were blown out. It was very terrifying. Very, very terrifying. We thought that we were going to be drowned, but thank God nothing exaggerated happened. But like the rest of the island is very, very devastated.
To see the devastation on the south side of Puerto Rico, which is little traveled by the officials here in the capital of San Juan, is to understand the despair of so many Puerto Rican people. They felt they were alone. But the big part of that problem was the lack of communication. There's no cell phone service. There's no internet, no telephones. That's why people began to panic. That's half of what is going on this island today. And that's something that can be that kind of reassurance can be brought by President Trump when he arrives here on Tuesday. But the whole fact that these power stations are up and running but cannot transmit power, that all goes back, that is traced back to the Puerto Rican Electric Power Authority. They went bankrupt a year ago. They have been scrimping on maintenance on the 16,000 miles of wires and cables that connect this island. I think that they should be absolutely criminally investigated for gross negligence, if not criminal incompetence. When the president comes bringing his message of reassurance to the Puerto Rican people, he will also have to decide what to do about the infrastructure on this battered island. The Puerto Rican Electric Power Authority is bankrupt, $6 billion in debt. Where is the money going to come to rebuild the infrastructure? In World War II, when the war was over, they had the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan rebuilt Europe from the ashes and chaos of World War II. What's needed here now, call it the Trump Plan, if you want. A man who's built impressive hotels and other buildings, if he seeks the American people's consent to spend billions of dollars to rebuild Puerto Rico, I think that the infrastructure can be replaced. It can be repaired. Absent that, I think this will happen the next time there's a storm comes blowing this way. In San Juan, Puerto Rico, Geraldo Rivera. Dana, back to you.
That was quite a report, and thanks to Geraldo for doing that for us tonight. He's been working so hard all week to bring us the story. And joining us live with more on the Trump administration's response to the disaster, let's go to Ed Henry. He's at the White House for us tonight. Ed?
Well, Dana, good to see you. Remember, right before Hurricanes Harvey and Irma, there had been a media narrative that these would be major tests for President Trump. Well, his administration largely passed those tests, at least in the early stages, and you heard them get very little credit. Now it's changed in the wake of Hurricane Maria. The administration very much playing defense because of those heartbreaking scenes you saw from Geraldo, his reporting, other reporting, suggesting the federal government has been a bit slower in its response to the devastation this time. That challenge for the president's administration made more difficult by Elaine Duke, the acting Homeland Security Secretary, who said yesterday here at the White House she was, quote, very satisfied with the response and went on to call it a, quote, good news story. That infuriated the San Juan mayor, who declared, quote, this is a people are dying story. This is a life or death story. There's a truckload of stuff that cannot be taken to people story. The president, though, was focused today on a far more favorable review, tweeting, quote, Puerto Rico Governor Ricardo Rossello just stated the administration and the president, every time we've spoken, they've delivered. The president today, at an impromptu news conference here at the White House, seemed to be defending Elaine Duke and his administration's response.
Elaine Duke is acting, and she's working very hard. And, I think what FEMA has done has been incredible between all of these hurricanes.
Interesting, because you can see the U.S. military still playing a very critical role. We've got these new photos tonight of the 101st Airborne Division going in, helping hospitals, other infrastructure on the ground. Secretary Duke is now on the ground as well in Puerto Rico. She clarified she meant this is a good news story because Americans are pitching in to help other Americans, and also said she's not yet satisfied. The president today said the administration is sending in truck drivers critically needed to get those supplies that have been piled on pallets waiting to get out through the difficult infrastructure. And the president also tweeted out that major decisions are going to have to be made between he and leaders in both parties on Capitol Hill about just how much in terms of resources they're going to put up to rebuild Puerto Rico, not just in this short-term relief, but long-term, Dana.
All right, Ed, thank you so much, and for all your work this week. Appreciate it. For a reaction, let's bring in my colleague from Fox News' The Five, Kimberly Guilfoyle, who is of Puerto Rican descent, and who, as I understand, Kimberly, you have family that is on the island right now. Have you been in touch with them?
Yeah, in different parts of the island, sadly, in the area over by Aguadilla and San Juan. And it's just tremendous suffering there on the island. But everybody's really pitching in, trying to help each other out, and just really brings out the best in humanity. And, there's many people questioning, has this administration, done enough, the president? And I think that when he gets there and sees in person the devastation and how badly the people of Puerto Rico are suffering, I know that he will step up to the plate and contribute even more than they're already doing, which so far they're definitely trying to make an impact.
It was interesting to hear Geraldo, who's been on the ground there all week, talk about a Marshall Plan or something like it, like a Trump plan being needed for Puerto Rico. I mean, that is just how devastating it is. That was a complete rebuild.
Absolutely, and it's an interesting and an important historical reference, because it does give you pause when you think about that. He's on the ground there, so he's able to see hands-on, firsthand knowledge and information about what's going on and what is needed. This really is, I think, a unique and important moment in President Trump's administration and early in his presidency to try to do something and really reach out and help the people of Puerto Rico, because if you do not establish the infrastructure now, this will happen again, like Geraldo said. So maybe it is time for the Trump plan.
He said something just now that I haven't heard him say all week, and maybe I missed it, but he said he thinks that there should be criminal indictments against the power company because it had failed the people, and it maybe corruption, maybe waste, maybe incompetence, that all of that money that was supposed to go to the grid was just not there.
Well, he's right. I think it's a really important point, because they have failed the people of Puerto Rico. Where was the money diverted to? It was supposed to go to this, so there wouldn't be so much devastation and destruction. People very concerned because they're not going to be able to get the power back up, electricity in some areas, maybe 6 months. That is unacceptable. It's untenable. And can you imagine that people actually stole and diverted funds and misappropriated it? Of course, they would be held liable, and if there was any loss of life from anything like that, they could be held criminally liable as well. I mean, those types of crimes cannot go unprosecuted and undetected. They should investigate it and make sure that the people who are doing that are held accountable so that they don't continue to steal from the people of Puerto Rico and create a dire situation like that.
Absolutely. And interesting that, there have been mixed messages from the island. So some of the mayors saying, like, this is a situation where we are dying. And I imagine that they're saying that because they're actually seeing it firsthand. And the governor, I think, being very smart.
Yes.
He's appreciative of what the federal government is doing. He doesn't want to criticize the president because he wants to have a good visit so that he can continue to get all of the aid that they're going to need. And the other thing that we didn't exactly talk about tonight is that you now have a 3-star general, General Buchanan, who's going to be on the ground there organizing the logistics.
I think that was one of the best pieces of news that I heard today come out of this situation in Puerto Rico, because if you have somebody there, nobody does it better than the United States military in terms of organizing, getting the supplies where they really need a general in there to do that. It shows you how seriously they're taking it. So that commitment of troops resources is going to be pivotal to make the change there and help the people that are suffering, for sure.
Well, I appreciate spending my week with you and that you're staying with us tonight.
And happy anniversary tomorrow to you and Peter.
Oh, that's right. 19 years.
I never forget.
I forgot to get a present, but I'll work on it. Maybe tonight. All right, Kimberly, thanks. When we come back, the head of the U.S. Air Force Academy delivering a powerful message in leadership after a horrible act of racism. Right after this. Welcome back. Earlier this week at the Air Force Academy's prep school in Colorado, 5 black cadet candidates found racial slurs written on their doors. And Lieutenant General Jay Silveria, the Academy superintendent, is delivering a powerful response to condemn the racist acts.
If you can't treat someone with dignity and respect, then you need to get out. If you can't teach someone from another gender, whether that's a man or a woman, with dignity and respect, then you need to get out. If you demean someone in any way, then you need to get out. And if you can't treat someone from another race or a different color skin with dignity and respect, then you need to get out.
Joining us now for reaction from Washington is Thomas McInerney, a Fox News contributor and a retired Air Force Lieutenant General. Sir, I'm so glad that you could be with us tonight to help us explain, because when I woke up and I saw this video going viral this morning, I thought, how does this actually happen at an Air Force Academy? I grew up in Colorado. I'm close to Air Force Academy. I liked going there, especially when I was on the speech and debate team at University of Southern Colorado. We'd go there all the time. And this just seemed very shocking to me, and I think it shocked the general as well.
By the way, Dana, I know they loved to have you there when you went. Yeah, look, the superintendent was spot on when he said you've got to get out. I want our viewers to understand, Dana, that this is a very rare incident. And I think when they go through and they do the investigation, it's going to turn to be an individual who came from a different environment and he didn't understand. Remember, those prep school cadets are in their brand new 2+ months. And so they haven't had the full indoctrination. It was not, as you pointed out in your introduction, it was not at the Air Force Academy per se. And so it's an anomaly. I can assure you, not only is the soup on it, but Secretary of the Air Force, Heather Wilson, General David Goldfein, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, by the way, they're both classmates from the Air Force Academy. They're going to have leadership all over it. It will be resolved. There's no question about it. Now, the political scene that we have been faced with the last 8+ years, and it's now exhibited by the NFL controversy, has politicized this racial issue to a fare thee well. It's unfortunate, and maybe that's why somebody got through in this particular case. But I feel very confident, Dana, that the Air Force leadership will solve it, and they'll solve it quickly.
Did you find it interesting, and maybe just a sign of the times, and it's new and it's modern, but the general gives them permission and encourages them, but he doesn't order them, to take out their phones and to videotape it. I thought that was interesting. Like, he's really in touch with this new generation that wants to have everything at their fingertips so that they can constantly look at it, and that was an interesting moment to me. And had you ever seen anything like that before?
No, we didn't have iPhones in my day. And the fact is, he wanted them to record it, as you pointed out, so that they can play it back and they know explicitly what the soup is telling them to do. And by the way, I think they'll find the person or persons and that they'll be dismissed for conduct unbecoming a cadet.
I wanted to ask you about a last question to you, which is that there's something about the military and how you are trained and the way that you are able to speak to people, and that leadership ability that is incredible. And in some ways, I feel like for these kids, this was like a parental moment, that you had somebody that was speaking from the heart. It wasn't a teleprompter. It wasn't just absolute leadership. And what do you think that comes from when you're in the military? Is there a special little secret sauce that you get when you're in there?
Well, when you send people on missions in combat to die, you learn to be very explicit, give them the guidance you have to. You accept the responsibility, but that's where they learn it. That's the secret sauce, Dana, and you just develop it over time. And of course, by the time the soup gets there as a 3-star, he has developed that. He has that experience, and that's why it's so vital to the leadership that he is passing down to the cadets.
Absolutely remarkable. And you, I know, sir, come from a military family, and so thank you for all that you've done and for being here tonight with us.
Thank you, Dana.
All right, up next, different subject altogether, is Oprah planning a presidential run in 2020? How she's setting off a frenzy of new speculation right after this.